I want to welcome Agile XRM to the podcast. I've known the people at Agile XRM for the past 12 years. I've seen how their business process management tool can add massive value to complex organizational processes in sectors such as finance and government. If you have complex processes or a need for dialogues on the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, take a look at how this BPM tool can add value. You can find them at agilexrm.com or check out the show notes for more details. Welcome to the Power 365 show, where I interview staff at Microsoft across the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 technology stack. I hope you'll find this podcast educational and inspire you to do more with this great technology. Now, let's get on with the show. Today's guest is from Nashville, Tennessee in the United States. He works at Microsoft as a principal program manager for Power Virtual Agents and Conversational AI. He's been working with Conversational AI for 8 years and with Microsoft Technologies and IT for over 25 years. You can find links to his bio, social media, etc. in the show notes for the episode, as well as we'll discuss a couple of other topics and we'll put links in the show notes so you can jump straight to what we refer to in this episode. Welcome to the show, Dwayne.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me today.
Good to have you on the show. I always like to bridge the personal with the professional to kick off an episode. And so just to start with, food, family, and fun, what do they mean to you? All those things when you're not, focused on your day job.
Yeah, so I got married, have 2 kids, one 16-year-old and one 13-year-old, and one of them is a field goal kicker. It's being professionally trained, and it's actually pretty good at that. And then a daughter who just won a national championship in cheering,
Awesome.
competitive cheerleading. And then, as far as food is concerned, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a too heavy of a sin for me. I like a lot of Southern U.S. Type of foods, which is generally bad for me, but it's enjoyable on the back end. So, but outside of that, I do a lot of like DJing and stage and lighting design. I actually even do that for a friend of mine who used to be the lead singer of Creed, Scott Stapp. So I do a lot of work with him and his charity as well to do stuff like that. So lots of stuff. Matter of fact, I think this week, Mark, I even learned how to stream from a drone through in a live stream so that my son's football games, I can stream it out over the internet and do the cool stuff that you do.
Wicked. Are we talking about a DJI drone?
I am talking about a DJI drone.
Awesome. Can you see that in the background there on mine?
Oh, yes. You matter of fact, I had to buy that same controller that you have in order to be able to live stream.
Yeah. So the funny thing is I virtually never use that controller. I tend to use the one that I plug my phone into rather than the one with the onboard screen. But yeah. Okay. So that's awesome. And the other thing that caught my attention in what you said there is lighting design. And for past sins in my life, I've been involved in that area myself as well. And isn't it just an amazing area and what you can do with software and lighting these days?
Oh, it's crazy. I actually have like 2 of the X lasers that you have to have FDA variances for, so I can do like atmospheric or laser shows on the side. And so being able to learn how to do that, and then like computers coming into DMX control and all of it's a super amazing topic. And who knows, Mark, maybe we'll end up having a podcast conversation about that one day.
So cool. And it's such a creative area, I feel, because it can bring, concerts, events to life. Like, the last, and I'm probably going to get some flack for this, the last big concert I went to was Taylor Swift with my wife. And what I couldn't get over, just the amount of theatrics now involved in a concert. It's everything from in the audience having bands on your arm that light up, or, things that as you enter at the gates that they give you to, I can't even remember how it was done because it was at actually another concert I was at in Sydney as well. And just the whole that plays in, the audience plays into the theatrics now of big stage events. It's pretty phenomenal where tech has enabled this.
Oh yeah, totally. Could you imagine as we kind of as we talk about like conversational AI, could you imagine just programming lights by just telling it the mood that you wanted
Yeah.
and things like
Amazing,
that?
right?
We're not far
Yeah.
from that, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's pretty
Now,
cool.
we're going to talk today a bit about power virtual agents and AI. And I hope I don't come across as too excitable about this because I honestly think this is the biggest opportunity in the power platform space, bar none. I mean, Copilot's awesome, don't get me wrong, and where that's ultimately going to play out. I'm loving the Copilot, particularly in Power Automate, and the signs of what's going to be possible from app development. But when I think of organizations and the amount of data that they have tied up inside them, that as in so data silos, etc., that they obviously can't in many situations, a lot of companies in the enterprise space have banned their staff using ChatGPT, right? The public accessible, because why? There's been already a bunch of use cases around people leaking confidential data out to train those models. And of course, Microsoft, and why I just want to dwell on this a second, because it took me a while to get my head around it, even back at MVP Summit, because I couldn't figure how you could hand your data to ChatGPT and if you like, not transfer across to a public system until I understood, of course, the whole concept of Azure OpenAI service, which means the large language model sits in your Azure tenant and does your bidding on your data as you make it available. Why this excites me is it because really anybody can bring their data inside the Azure tenant, and then with the Power Virtual Agent interface, they have a way of tapping into current data, historic data. The knowledge of that organization becomes available in a fully secure, trusted manner. So as I said, hopefully I don't get too excited about this, but I just think this is the most amazing area of tech at the moment.
Yeah, totally. I think the shocking part of this, so Mark, you got to realize I've been in this whole conversational AI space with bot framework and everything. And it's just been kind of like it was going along and people were interested and you would have these implementations here and there. But I think it was around Christmas time this past year when this just exploded. And then we doubled down in the Power Virtual Agents team. I remember the day that my leader came in and he's like, no, this is the thing. Like, we have to get on this. And everybody just went heads down to make sure that we could really deliver some really interesting experiences that were really differentiating in the market space. And this is where you saw all the generative actions, the co-pilots, the generative answers type of feature sets coming into the product, and how can we make these things work together and such. And you just saw this massive increase in that direction. And over time, it's just really started to make a lot of sense why conversational applications are going to become really a thing of the future. And we just didn't think it was going to come quite as quick, because I was still worried about like NLU and how is the best way to train the NLU. And now we're at a point where I would say in 12 to 18 months, you probably would never train an NLU ever again because of this type of technology. So it's just an interesting innovation, and it's so quick. That's just the craziest part.
NLU, just for the audience, meaning?
Natural language understanding, for those
Excellent.
that don't know.
Brilliant. Tell me, what in your words, because you're living and breathing this every day, for the last 8 years, but particularly in what's happened since Christmas, as you said, Power Virtual Agents and AI. How do you explain it to people? How do you get them excited? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. So, if you're talking to just the general layman, right, you kind of have to explain to them, there's a smart speaker you talk to. That's how most people think of conversational AI, or they think of, imagine you go to a website and you have a chat experience or something like that. And so what people will tell you is, yeah, I hate those things, right? Or they're either really passionate about it, they use them all the time. But what you basically have to get people to start to understand is the concept. Imagine if that smart speaker that sat on your desk had access to knowledge and information. Everyone's experienced this. You ask a question to your phone's assistant or anything of that nature, and you don't get it. It really isn't programmed to do that thing. So what you end up with is you end up with a result that's subpar. It like falls back to search or something like that. What we're starting to see now is the ability for those things to really actually understand the words you're saying. Before we were doing like keyword matching and things of this nature. Now it actually understands what you said and can understand the context of a conversation, but then it can also consume data in the same way and look for relevancy and be able to match those things up. And once you do that, you start unlocking the power of data and and natural language in a way that's never been done before. And so that's really where it becomes the massive innovation is you're telling the computer what to do in natural language, and it truly understands what you mean. And it also truly understands the data and the things that are available in the back end. And when you start thinking like, oh, well, then you can even explain to it in natural language what an API does, right? Or an application programming interface for those that don't know, like how to submit a form for something to a back end or help you find the best, product that it meets your needs. You can pull that out of the words and pull it from the data and then map it and automatically get answers to things just like as if you were talking to a live person. It's really innovative. And then you start getting into like, oh, and I can make it say it in the way you want, make it talk like a travel agent or something like that. So it's really interesting. I think we're just at the tip of an iceberg of playing with this stuff right now. And I think it will just get better and better over time. Because I think part of the problem is that the language models are majorly innovative right now, but it's the surrounding tech around it that makes it safe and makes it usable for the average person. Because right now what you see is a lot of people going back and forth and trying to figure out how to apply it. I think this will normalize itself and commoditize itself over time.
Yeah.
And that's going to be and that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to take it and make it commoditized for use for the average person and unlock that power without having to have a team of data scientists sitting on staff, right? That's kind of the key.
I'm bringing back the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge in 2024 for people who want to take their Microsoft business applications career to the next level. So far, over 700 people have been involved in the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge from 67 countries. And I'm constantly blown away by the stories I hear about what they have gone on to achieve and contribute to this great global community. Based on past feedback from participants, in 2024, I'll be adding more content and updating the classic modules, as well as making it more time zone friendly. If you would like to be involved, register your interest today at ako.nz365guy.com. That's ako.nz365guy.com. Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that about data scientists, because I was always, in the past, up to December, January, that for an organization to be massively successful, it's going to need data science as scientists on their team. And dating back to 2015, 2016, the organization I worked for, we had data scientists, and yet they never saw the breakthroughs that we're seeing now. But also what I'm meaning is that where that was kind of that was a phenomenal skill set and out of the reach, now with prompt engineering and things like that, a lot of lay people are starting to get high value responses from data. I was just talking to somebody yesterday, another Microsoftie, and they were saying that a person needed to build a connector to the Power Platform and to load a whole bunch of data in. And based on the size of it, that was the preferred method over Power Automate being the method. This person didn't know how to code. They used Copilot, in Visual Studio, got it set up, and in 10 hours built a full working API connector and was able to load their 60,000 records. They'd been quoted by a partner 50 hours to do that. And it's kind of like it's bordered into the realms of people that had the will to do it, but didn't have the tech training, background, resources to be able to make that a reality. And I think that's the game changing kind of situation that we're seeing in a lot of organizations. It is democratization, right? It's making it available to everybody.
Yeah, and for those that aren't familiar with how to do a connector or whatever, you go take a look at this, and I actually have a set of videos that I've provided Mark, and it'll be in the show notes. There's I think I bake it down to like 15 minutes, teach you how to build a custom connector to consume any API that you want. So if it's not already there, or you have like this custom endpoint that you want to bring in, it's super, super key. And if you start really thinking about it, and Mark, I'm going to blow your mind for a second, right? Because we will get to talking about generative actions as we go into this conversation. And for those that don't know, generative actions kind of like LangChain. If you want to go look up LangChain or things of that nature, what you're going to see is how is a plugin and a connector really different in this whole world. So people don't realize that have been building connectors for the Power Platform forever. You've been basically defining an API, and you're writing descriptions on what it is, and you're explaining in natural language what it does. So what keeps you from using a large language model to be able to understand how to use it? And so when you start getting to that world, it really starts blowing people's minds, like the stuff we showed at Build around generative actions. They're like, how in the world is it possible? And it's like, when you have over 1,000 connectors in a library that say what they do, and you just simply explain what it does and plug it into your thing and allow it and give it how to connect to the service, it can just figure it out. And that's really, it's almost scary in some ways, Mark, right? But I will say that we're not 100% there yet. I feel like there's a lot of, like I said, the wrapper around this stuff that you got to get down to be able to make sure that it does it with a high level of accuracy at the orchestration layer. But it's not far away, right? I think a lot of people think, oh, that's 6 years down the road. And I'm like, no, I think that's like 6 months down the road type of thing.
5 to 10 years ago, I would go around Australia and I would speak at events for Microsoft on big data. There are 4 mega trends that we're going to transform, and big data was one of them, right? And I felt that what we have seen is organizations get really good at collecting data, but they haven't got really good at making it available. So they collect it. You know, things like GDPR, et cetera, have gone and put some governance around it, but they're not really good at making all these data silos across their data estate available for consumption to grow a more informed staff to do the role of whatever they're doing inside that organization. And so I feel like the payback for all that data collection is really AI is going to make it possible to turn it into something practical.
Yeah, I think there's still a piece, and this is one of the things that's as we start working with customers in trying to unlock the knowledge out of the data, right? You have to keep in mind that a large language model, for example, can understand the data, can understand what you asked about the data, and can read tons of data and come back and give you an answer summarized off of the information. But I'll give you a good example of where there's still a challenge in the world, right? So there's this, for those that don't know, there's this feature called generative answers that's inside of Power Virtual Agents. And what it is it's basically what we refer to as search and summarization. So it searches across data that you pointed at, and then it understands the question that you asked. And without you having to have data scientists to make sure that it doesn't cuss at you or say something it shouldn't say, what it does is it will search and summarize the answers over that data set that you have, that you pointed it at. And if that data set happens to be like stored in a Microsoft place, we figure out where's the best place to search to get that content. So if it's a website, it will use Bing and the Prometheus engine. If it's SharePoint, it will use the graph, things like this, right? So what we found though is we went and pointed it at all of the different financial reports from Microsoft. And then we asked it who's the CEO of Microsoft. The problem is that the answer you get would be different. Sometimes it would say Satya Nadella, sometimes it would say Bill Gates, sometimes it would say Steve Ballmer, right? And the reason is because I think where we're going to start seeing people to really unlock their data, they're going to have to start thinking data equivalent to code in a way. So the same way you think about you have data and you develop the data for your website and you go through a publishing process to put the data and the content to say, this is the authoritative answer. This is that article that says how to do this, or this is that knowledge base update, right? You might have versions of it, but what you want to present to the model and to the responder or the response system, right, is you want to present the authoritative answer data, right? You don't want all the drafts, you don't want all the old stuff. And so what we're seeing is people having to realize that they need to think about their data publishing process and how they're doing it, like pointing it at a SharePoint library that you have everybody's making a copy of the same file and coming up with different answers to the question will just get you inconsistent results. It would be poor results. So it's kind of like if you put garbage in, you'll get garbage out. Everybody always says that. So now what we're seeing is people, especially with PBA, what our hope is that people will stop trying to build models to do search and summarization.
Yes.
Just use the commodity for that and focus on data quality to the model. And that's where you will get higher quality results out of it. It's actually not necessarily in the prompt engineering, which is where everybody seems to want to play right now. But that stuff's going to get commoditized pretty darn quick. So I don't think you really need to play in that space too much just to get knowledge summarization and things from content.
That alone is a phenomenal cost savings to organizations. I'll give you a use case. Working with a bank, a large bank across Australia, New Zealand. They have a call center, internal call center, that costs them between 3 and 4 million per annum to run. And its job is at a bank teller, if they have a customer in front of them and they need to know the 90-day fixed term rate. Now, when they type that into their data repository, like you said with the example of the, who's the CEO of Microsoft, they get 300 responses of that fixed rate could have been from 5 years ago, right? And what they want is so what they're doing at the moment is that teller is calling up somebody in the internal contact center, getting them to search and filter down and give them it's 17.9 or 5.3, right, percent, because that's today's term deposit rate. And of course, we're going, hey, this is that teller could easily, with a chat experience on the device, key in what was requested, and it gives the answer based on the location, the date of today, etc., and provide the most relevant answer with links to if there's a document that needs to be handed out with it, etc., disclosure statement, that type of thing. If that can be solved, that's a massive savings, right? That's to the business.
Yeah, totally. And that's the difference between. So I'll put it this way. So I'll give you a great example, Mark. Where we see people getting really confused is the difference between knowledge extraction or what we call generative answers and generative actions. And why are they different, right?
Yes.
Generative answers is the fact of I have a whole bunch of knowledge that is in documents and things like that. And that information, I compare this, if I talk about it in like a cruise line example, right? Whether or not Jack Daniels is included in the premium drink package or not is generally something that's in an article somewhere that said, and that's something you're going to extract the data off of that. But if I want to know what cruises leave out of a certain port within a certain price range, that's probably not something you're going to pull from content. People confuse that in a website because they go, well, no, that's on the website, but it's not stored in the website as an article or something, right? It's actually an API that's being called on the back end. So in the case for what you were talking about, this is where generative actions would play, because you would have an API that understands what are the pieces of information I need to be able to go get the answer to that question, what that rate is. And then I will return it. And so the cool thing, what we're going to see happen, and this is going to be happening very soon, is the ability for you to be able to just plug in that connector to that API in the Power Platform, and just say, if someone asks this question, here's the API to get it from. And if they provide the information, if they say, what is the rate in Australia, then it will automatically fill in the API to say, I need the Australia one.
Yes.
If you don't say that, then what it will say is, well, what country are you looking for the rate for? And then you'll fill it in. So whatever you don't provide as required information in that connector, it will generate a question to get the answer from the user and then provide it. But when it starts getting really crazy is when you get into the planner. And the planner is the ability to say, oh, the information you gave me through this conversation, I already know who you are because you authenticated. So I can go to your profile through a different API to get what location you're from and provide that location in so that I don't have to ask you that question.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between the planner and the connector component of it. And you'll see generative actions. One of the things that we're looking at is breaking it kind of into those two different major components, where there's one component that's the planner that helps orchestrate it and figure out a plan to answer the question. And another one, which is how does it consume an API or a plugin just to be able to make it where you don't have to author all of the different ways that somebody might interact with that API. So it's kind of really, you start getting into this, it starts to make your head hurt in a way.
And it makes you want to get your hands on and really start experiences. Now, one of the resources we're going to provide in the show notes was to a blog post that was written by Sarah Critchley on August the 7th, 2023. Do you want to talk a bit about what was announced in that and really what the impact it is for people that really want to get going now on Power Virtual Agents, get up their skill level, because this is really, I see, as a practical way to use AI, generative AI, in your organization?
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion in two different key areas that's going on with people in this. And when we get into when we were talking about extracting information out of knowledge, which was generative answers, right? A lot of people kept coming to us and saying, we're totally confused. Generative answers is this thing inside of PVA that will answer stuff over your data. Then I have Azure OpenAI on your data. What is that? And then you have Azure OpenAI, which is what? And so I had to start likening this. I like to use analogies that people can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
So Azure OpenAI is like buying a brick, right? Azure OpenAI on your data is like buying a wall. And then when you look at generative answers inside of PVA, it's like buying a house. And what do I mean by that? So if you look at it, you say, okay, well, generative answers actually includes an OpenAI implementation, an Azure OpenAI implementation that's trained by data scientists and a whole bunch of services to do query optimization, moderation, and make sure that you can ask a question, you can point it at a set of data, and it will respond to you with an answer, with reference links and things like that, right? And you don't need to know anything about that except here's the data I want to give it, right? I provided the question that someone asked, I provided where the data is that I want the answer done, and it just handles it, right? But what if your data, so let's think, Mark, what about if my data is stored across multiple locations and maybe my data, it's stored inside of PDFs and I need to be able to do vectorized search over it to be able to improve the search results that are being given back. Well, that's what you get with Azure OpenAI over your data, because now you are in control of the indexer or the query itself that is going in, but you still didn't have to, you're still taking advantage of all of that tuning that's been done on the Azure OpenAI model without having to hire the data scientist to go do that. You're not managing prompts at this point, right? And if you're not familiar with prompts, for people who don't know what that is, it's simply, think of it as the words in natural language that explain to it. Like you should never do this and you should do that. And this is where we get into Azure OpenAI. So Azure OpenAI is an implementation where you're in control of the prompts. And there's two levels of prompts that you have to worry about. Think of it like if you've ever heard of the laws of robotics. There's a base set of rules that you want to give that can never be broken, or it's kind of like, hey, these are the things that govern the system. And then there are ones that come in behind the scenes that are part of the query itself that allow it to be able to do it. So if you wanted to make it talk, when you say, hey, make me a poem about Tom Brady in the style of Old English, right? The way that it's doing that is it's actually in the prompt in the query that you're sending that. The fact that you want a poem, the fact that you want it about Tom Brady, the fact that you want it in the style of Old English is actually part of the prompt that you're passing in as the query. But the base training of the model is don't allow someone to ask a question that results in insulting them or cursing at them, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Things of this nature. And if you look at the Bing thing that happened inside of Microsoft, where people were talking to the bot for like hours and hours, and then they were able to get it to do stuff that it shouldn't do. This is an example of the worry that you have to have as a data scientist when you are doing Azure OpenAI by itself. And so those prompts and things like that, you have to come up with, it's almost, I explained this, a bunch of my friends are lawyers, and I said, a data scientist has to think like a lawyer. What are all the loopholes that someone might find in the training set? And one of the number one things you need to do is tell it never to divulge its training, which is one of the things that we learned, right? So it's just stuff like this that it kind of helps people understand, like, how much control do you want? But with each control level that you release as you move down that stack from generative answers and down, while you're gaining control, you're also gaining the need for you to really know what you're doing. Because if you index content that people don't have rights to, and you expose it externally and allow people to ask questions over it, that was your decision on the Azure for OpenAI over your data, right?
Yeah.
Because you own the index, you own the control. And so these type of things, you just have to make sure that you understand. And I think that's the biggest risk, Mark. I think a lot of people find it because they can do stuff really easy and really quickly, but they don't necessarily think about what all do you need to do. And a lot of people don't understand that the reason why it takes a little while for us to get stuff out in PVA, for example, is we spend a lot of time with our applied AI team and our responsible AI team to make sure that what we're doing is safe, because we want to make sure that it's safe. It's not just because it's cool and you can do it and it's awesome in a demo. It takes a lot to make sure that it's good enough to go out in the public.
One of the game changers I've seen is in the area of SAP, and a great percentage of business customers globally are using Microsoft Teams right now. And these big enterprises will often have data locked up in SAP systems, and you never find a general person inside an organization that says, oh man, I love working in SAP. Brilliant. I could spend my entire life, right? Most people are like, oh my gosh, it takes so much effort to get to the information that I need. And, one of the use cases that are becoming up consistently is that you put Power Virtual Agents inside Teams and you can go, hey, are there any outstanding shipments for this week? And it can go and query that, come back with an answer. That would have been 15 clicks in the past, within the SAP experience. And so people are really starting. But you give them that data model. One of the things you're not wanting to do is go, hey, you have access to Workday, and now I can query people's salaries inside the business, right? You making sure that kind of protection is in place is so important, and that the what data is accessible, because a lot of companies have, of course, confidential data that's even confidentially internally, right? It's not that you're an employee and therefore you've access to everything, right? There's need to know in many organizations. How do you see companies getting that bit right? Is it going to still need the data scientist inside the organization that says, listen, even though we're giving it access to this data set, we've got to make sure it can't access this portion here because that's confidential? and it should be based on someone's security role as to whether they can query that's it there. So, that whole identifying who they are is important to the questions that they can ask.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. It goes back to kind of what I was talking about before. I actually see this function coming before too much longer within organizations that are going to need to be able to think about, and you already sort of have it today in the form of like data architecture. And so what I anticipate is that this is going to become the instrumental component that organizations have to go make sure they get right before they can really extract the value out of large language models. And so it's interesting. It's like I said before, people are really worried about how they go do prompt engineering and how they go do all this stuff. But what you're going to see is every vendor in the world is already figuring out how to do that over their own where they store their data. The question becomes is how are you going to publish that data in a secure way and in an authoritative way? And what are the key triggers to be able to make sure that the system knows, one, do you have rights to ask this question over that data? Like you can ask a question, but I could also come back and say, I'm sorry, I can't answer that for you. And maybe I say that to one person in the organization, but I don't say it to the CEO because he has access, right? So, so when you start looking at things like this, data access, data quality, data governance, all of these are going to be massive places that people are really going to need help. And I think if I look across like our partners and things of that nature, or you start looking at organizations, they're so busy worrying about how to get the response off the data that most of the time what we've found is they can't go forward because they realize very quickly that the data that they have access to hasn't been managed properly, and therefore they've got a data quality issue.
Exactly.
And I will tell you that I'll give you a funny story, Mark. So we launched generative answers with PVA. And the first feature that we did is we launched it with the Bing Prometheus engine. So if you pointed at a website, and what we ended up having was we had a bunch of customers come back to us and they said, hey, why did you answer this question? There's a problem here. You shouldn't be able to answer that question. And how did you get that reference link to where that is? That's not supposed to be where people can see it. And you know what it was? It was the fact that they put it out onto the internet. They never did anything with the SEO or search engine optimization piece. They didn't say, don't allow a search engine to crawl this thing.
Don't crawl it.
And they ended up finding all kinds of things that they had basically put in obscurity, thinking that it wasn't going to get crawled by search engines, but the search engines found it, and therefore it could answer the question. And so we ended up turning it around and saying, hey, we just helped you figure out where you have data issues. So it's really funny that you will find every data issue you've ever had in your life by using a large language model. It's pretty interesting. And that's why I tell people start with, I think a lot of people think, oh, I just would point it at my entire SharePoint or my entire Workday, right? And that's probably not the right first step. The first step is crawl, give it a few things, like maybe give it a few product manuals or something like that, or something of that nature. And it's also interesting that people seem to want to start with internal data, but is that not the scariest place, Mark? I would actually start with public data and work my way to private data, because it's so much easier to take something that's public and just say, here's the quality of it, make sure it's pointing at the right quality stuff, versus also trying to figure out data access rights and the risk that comes along with that. It's a very interesting problem set.
For a public data set, is what it's doing, is it basically crawling all the links on that public data set, or do you need an RSS feed in that public data set? What's its method of gathering the body of knowledge before it starts answering?
Yeah, so in most cases, if you're using like the Bing Prometheus engine, what it's doing is it's using the index off of Bing. So when Bing goes through and does its stuff, but when it finds results, it goes out and grabs the actual HTTP page and pulls that content in so that it gets the latest version of that information. And then that's what it does for the search and summarization action. But one of the things that a lot of people don't know, Mark, is that you can actually use Bing with a custom query.
Yes.
And what that means is, for those that don't know, you can go to Bing and there's a way to say, I want to
Correct.
build my own custom query. And so whenever you pass it in and you say, here's the URL, you pass in also this unique identifier as part of it. And what the result will be is it will scope the data down to what you want. So that's a way for you to be able to kind of control the data set that's kind of being returned with Bing. Otherwise, you have to start thinking about the indexer and where is the indexed content and what's the ability. So like a lot of people think, well, I've got a PDF on my website. Well, Bing doesn't crack PDFs. So you got to come up with how do you index that? And then if you have a document, and let's say it's 150 pages, you can't afford to run that back in through the tokens that you would have to buy for a large language model. So that's where you start getting into vector-based search being pretty important so that you can basically chunk the file. So maybe I only want to return a paragraph within a document, not the entire content of the document whenever I return it. So these are kind of the challenges that you start to run into. And I think this is the part that when people first get into this, they're like, oh, it's going to be super cool and I'm going to be able to do it. And then you go, oh, I got to get search right. I got to figure out how to index that content. Once you get that down, the results will blow your mind, but it's really kind of the key thing. So it depends on kind of where your data is and how you want to access it and how is it stored. But most people for public data, I tell them the best way is to put it directly so you don't have to pay for your own indexing. The engines do a great job. So take your content and publish it in an ASPX page or an HTML page with the content. And as long as you don't make it non-crawlable,
Yes.
then the systems will do the work for you. You don't have to necessarily do it. You just have to make sure that the content's up to date and it's right. The rest of it solves itself.
That's awesome. We're already at time, well past time. We could talk for ages on this. Anything you want to say in closing?
No, I think in general, for those that are interested in this, definitely stay tuned. You can go out if you want to play with a trial. You can go to aka.ms/trypva. You can also follow me on YouTube. I think it's Dwayne27, and I spell Dwayne really weird, so make sure you look at the show notes on how it's spelled. Also, if you follow me on LinkedIn or join up on LinkedIn, what I try to do is make sure that the things that are relevant are published for people so that they can see. And I try to focus on educational type of things, not necessarily just product announcements. The blog is a good place to get the product announcements. It's in the show notes as well. But in general, get in there, get your hands dirty, start playing with this and enjoy kind of the innovation that's there. And just be aware that, my key guidance to people is don't try to be the wave, ride the wave of innovation. Let the big players commoditize where they're going to commoditize, make sure you understand where they're going, and just make sure that what you're doing is you're not trying to duplicate them or jump far ahead, because the reason why you might get ahead in the short term is you're going to cut some corners. It's likely to cost you in quality or some sort of hard lesson you're going to learn. So I would just say, in general, stay tuned. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming. And Mark, you don't even want to know what all we're going to announce in the coming months. It's going to blow your mind even more. So please go to the Power Platform Conference if you can, or show up at Ignite. There will be plenty of new cool stuff that we're going to talk about as we get closer.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show from Microsoft, please message me on LinkedIn. If you want to be a supporter of the show, please check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. How will you create on the Power Platform today? Ciao.